Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name's Harold Pearson. I'm alcoholic. Appreciate everyone being here tonight. This is a privilege and honor to introduce our speaker tonight. I'm not going to take up much of his time because we need to hear his message. But I've heard him a few times, and what I always appreciate about Wallace, we heard the promises was just read. One of them, a new freedom, a new happiness. And this man, I've seen him talk about that new freedom and that new happiness. And I think he's experienced freedom that probably a lot of us in here has never experienced to the depth that he has. But also I remember him talking about being up in Montreal at the International Convention one time, not long after he came back from it, and I just seen the tears stream down his face as he was sharing about looking out over the city of Montreal and being a free man and how God's grace in his life had brought that about. And I always remember that, and I always want to see Wallace. I always love to go make sure I shake hands with him because he's meant a lot to me in my recovery. So if y'all will help me welcome Wallace B. from Southern Pines.
It don't matter, I'm all here because I'm not all there. It is good to be here tonight. I appreciate Harold inviting me down, but I certainly didn't know that he'd be getting a chip tonight. But anniversaries are real important. I had the pleasure of celebrating one last week. Well, my anniversary was really the 16th of February, and last week when I was celebrating, actually my step-grandson told me right after the meeting, he said, "Papa, in 2 more weeks, you and I will have 56 years together." He'll be celebrating 2 of them. It is good to be here tonight. I know I'm an alcoholic, and if you see me wiping, don't get afraid. It'll be all I wipe tonight. I have a heart condition, and one of my medicines causes my nose to run when I get nervous and when I start eating. And I'm a little bit nervous right now. I'm always nervous when I first start, and I can't help it. Got some people here tonight from Albemarle who heard me Saturday night, and they're just a glutton for punishment. Here we go again. I'm going to tell the same little old joke that I told Saturday night, and everybody, in order to make me feel better, they sort of laughed at it a little bit. But I like it. Thank you, Harold. I was looking under here to see if he'd put a bucket there. He didn't. It is good to be here. This old drunk, everybody likes a drunk joke. And Harold's got a good one too. But this drunk was walking up the street, and he was using all of the sidewalk, from one side of the sidewalk to the other. He's going along, he's humming, and he's just killed a half a fifth of wine, and he's got the other half a fifth in his overcoat pocket. He's just walking along, minding his own business, staggering from one side to the other. Up the street there was a Mayflower moving van, and guys were moving furniture out of a house up on the hill here that did not have a driveway. They were coming down the walkway, then had to come down steps to the other walkway that was on the street. And it was one guy coming along. He had a great big tall grandfather clock on his back. He's walking along like that. And he gets down on the sidewalk, and a drunk walks right into him, knocks the man down. The clock falls, springs are coming out, glasses on the street, and the bong, bong, bong is sounding. The man is sitting on one side of the clock, and the drunk is on the other. And that man looked at that drunk and said, "You're the stupidest somebody I've ever seen. You're the drunkest somebody I've ever seen. why don't you watch where you're going? And the drunk looked at him and said, you're the stupidest son of a gun I ever seen. Why don't you wear a wristwatch like everybody else? I believe that really happened. I don't believe it's somebody just make it up. But it is good that we can laugh today when we look back over our lives and think about it's only through the grace of God and the program of AA that this old boy could have come from where I was February 16th, 1964 to where I am tonight, and to have enjoyed the marvelous journey that I've been on. My sister moved from Sanford to Clovis, South Carolina about 12 years ago. And she moved because she went to a revival down in Charlotte, and she met a minister down there, and he was about 74, 76 years old, and she was about 70. And about 2 weeks later, they was talking about getting married. And they were really in love. And I know it was love because at that age, they were not coming in heat. They married. And several years later, my wife and I went down to have Thanksgiving with them. And I'm sitting at the end of the table, my sister's sitting over there. And her and her husband had sold their homes and had built another home in a gated community. Beautiful home. And I'm sitting at that table eating that good chicken and beans and turnip greens and all that good stuff. And she said, Wallace says, how do you like this new, beautiful home we have in this gated community? I said, well, sis, don't forget that at one time I lived in the biggest house in Raleigh, and it was definitely a gated community. She started kicking me on the leg, wanted me to stop, and I got the message. I know my brother-in-law had some questions to ask when I left. She's never mentioned that again to me. But it is good to be here tonight. It's good that we can look at our past and thank God from where we have come. I know I'm an alcoholic. I know I have been one since I was about 20 years old, but I certainly did not know it at that time. I was born and raised in Roxborough, North Carolina, and the best thing about Roxborough is 501 heading south. And I live about 0.8 of a mile off 501 now in Sanford. Nice highway, good place to be from, Roxborough. There's nothing wrong with Roxborough. I was the one that was screwed up. They escorted me out of town in 1963, handcuffed and shackled between two other people. And I was taken to the walls of Central Prison as a result of crimes that had been committed after 4 days and 3 nights of complete blacked out drunkenness. And that was not the goal I had in mind when I began drinking when I was 17 years old. I began sipping a little beer because older guys were running around with me in my car and they were drinking beer. And I began to sip a little beer with them. I didn't like it. I didn't like the taste of it. I didn't get enough in me. I did it for 2.5, 3 years. I would pour out good beer when I'd be around those guys. I didn't want them to know I was drinking so little. I knew why Budweiser had all those horses around. I didn't like it. And my idea about booze changed. I had been drafted into the Army in 1953. The Korean War was in progress. I took basic at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. I ended up at Fort Lee, Virginia in October of that year. In November of 53, I went home to Roxborough on a weekend pass. That Saturday night, a couple of friends come by the house. They knew I was home, and they wanted me to go to dance with them. I said, okay. I had been to that dance before, but I had never danced. I'd never felt like dancing. I was always feeling inferior, less than, uneducated, tall, skinny, backwoods, country. I was real skinny. I was 6'2" at that time, 138, 140 pounds. People in school said that I had a sister so skinny, she swallowed an olive and 2 men left town. Now, I wasn't that skinny, but I felt bad about myself. That Saturday night, I'm at that dance. I'm standing over in the corner of the room at a big pot-bellied heater, and there was a lot of pot-bellied people in there, and some very, very attractive. And I'm standing at that heater watching people have a good time. Laugh, talk, dance, socialize, hold those girls close, buy the chasers, go out to the car, take a drink, come back in, and have a ball. And I'm standing there. I can't join in, I can't participate, because I'm backward and I'm a country and uneducated. I felt inferior and less than. I'm watching over there toward the door, and there was a window there. People would come up to the window, buy a ticket, go around and come in the door. And I saw some arms stick in the window, get a ticket, and around to the door she went. And when she got to the door to come in, 2 humongous protrusions came in that door a long time before she did. And she came in that room and started walking over toward the heater where I was. I'm standing there, flat top haircut about like it is now, except it was a different color and a lot thicker. I had that Army OD uniform on that looked sharp. It was real tight fitting. Had little pins on the shoulder to make it look better. All the medals on I'd earned at the PX that afternoon. And apparently she was attracted to it. She came over and started talking to me, and my buddies were looking over that way, and they began whispering to each other. And I didn't know what they was whispering about and grinning about at me. And other people began to look that way. And I'm embarrassed, because I had recognized her when she was walking across that floor. Had never seen her before in my life. But I had heard tales about her in service stations, and beer joints, and pool rooms. I heard tales about her that would curl your hair. And she's there talking to me. And I'm embarrassed, because my preacher brother warned me about that. And we talked for a little bit. I did most of the listening. And then she asked me, would I escort her out to the car? You know, I'm right out of basic training. I got on all my medals. Maybe it's my patriotic duty to escort her across that parking lot. There might be some wolves in the parking lot. And we get out to the car, and I am very, very fearful. I'm upset. My preacher brother warned me about getting involved with naughty girls, and I get in that car. She starts the motor up. She starts the radio up. She starts the heater up. Then she put her arm around me and tried to start me up. And I'm restless, ill at ease, and discontent. I've never been in a situation like that, or had been talked to like that, as she was nibbling on my ear and squeezing me. And I was feeling funny. And we sat there for a little bit, and she wasn't making much progress. She reached in the glove compartment, got 2 cups under the seat, and pulled out a pint of white moonshine whiskey. And she poured out 2 cups of whiskey, and she's sitting down, holding that whiskey. And I'm looking at her. I'm looking at that whiskey, listening to that music, thinking about what Mom and Dad had told me. thinking about the possibilities of the evening from what I heard, and I had a battle going on up there. Should I drink it or should I not? Should I not? And I look at her, she's beautiful. And I look at them, and they are too. And I think that any alcoholic, a potential alcoholic, under those circumstances, is going to take a drink. And I took a drink. And I tried to act as that was something I've been doing all my life. We sat in the car, and we had 2 or 3 more cups of whiskey, probably out there 30 or 40 minutes. And while I was in that car, slowly, a transition took place in my life I had absolutely never experienced before in my life. My experience with women up until that night was about like my being in the Army. I had fired off a few good rounds, but I'd never been in combat. We sat in the car a little while longer, and I became a little bit aggressive in that well-lit parking lot. She suggested we go on and dance. We went and danced, and fiddle and guitar and banjo struck up a tune, dialing cabbage down, baked them whole cakes brown. And everybody joined hands and started running around that room, and she grabbed me by the hand, and out on the floor we went. I never danced before in my life. We circled that room about twice, and I could do it. Do-si-do, promenade, lemonade, whatever they was doing, I could do it. And when they started the bunny hop, now that just come natural. I loved it. I loved it. But the bouncers didn't like me being so aggressive in that bunny hop with people I didn't even know. And they showed me where the door was, and showed her too. And after the door we went, and we went someplace that ain't none of your business. And I gotta stop right there on that. I can't tell you everything that happened. But about 2:30 in the morning, I'm at home in the bed I'd slept in for years before going in the Army. And I'm laying there. I don't ever want to sleep. I just want to lay there and rethink Saturday night over and over and over. Loved every moment, everything that had happened. I had grown up and had become a man. I knew that come the next weekend I'll be buying my first pint of whiskey, and I did that when I left Fort Lee, Virginia. And that became a habit, looking forward to Friday night, getting home, or going out in Virginia on Friday night and Saturday night and drinking. And then I found out that when we go into the Richmond during the week, we go into the beer joints in Petersburg, that if you got enough booze in you, it would have the same effect on Tuesday night or Wednesday night or Thursday night that it had on Saturday night. And it became a habit with me. And over a very short period of time, the habit became an obsession. And I really didn't know what craving was at the time, but I knew that I always wanted a drink, especially after I put one into my system. I didn't know that it was activating that obsession of the mind, the allergy of the body that compelled me to drink against my better will and judgment. But I'd do that. And I had some trouble during the first 2 years, nothing to mount anything. AWOL one time for a few hours, but there's nothing severe. I got out with an honorable discharge, rank of PFC, went home to Roxborough, went to work in the mill. 18 months later, after having been in the National Guard for those 18 months at home, having been in high school to get that check from the government for going to school, I'd made good money, had a green Hudson Hornet, felt like I was Richard Petty, and I'd drive and race and drink and get in trouble and lose my license. And I found out that you really didn't need a license to drive unless they stopped you. And I got caught several times for driving under the influence after license revoked, resisting arrest, and such little minor stuff like that. In '56, this must have been August or September, back home there was an old saying that kids in the back seat can cause accidents. Well, accidents in the back seat can cause kids. And my girlfriend told me we should get married. And I told her I was in no condition to get married. She said, the condition I'm in, we better get married. We did get married. But 9 days later, I was back on active duty. I had gone down to Fort Jackson and re-upped. And went back on active duty. Some 3 months later, I'm on a ship en route to Korea. The Korean War was over. The war ended when I was in basic training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. I think they knew I was coming. Anyway, I was en route to Korea. And I remember standing at the rail of that ship one morning, thinking about my life since I had started drinking, of all the trouble I'd been into, wrecking cars, driving under the influence, after license revoked, promising mom and dad, get me out of this one, I'll never do it again. Promising employers, if you don't fire me this time, I'll never do it again. I had been fired and hired over and over again at the plant I went to work in when I got out of there. I had trouble with company commanders during that first year. But en route to Korea, I said I will not drink when I get to Korea. I had made Corporal in the National Guard, and I wanted to make Sergeant. In Korea, I began soldiering like I ought to. I stayed away from drinking. I wanted to. I really had to fight the obsession. I stayed so busy I would not drink. Going to school at night to complete my high school education. I was elected Company Soldier of the Month 5 consecutive times. Wow. Battalion Soldier of the Month 3 consecutive times. I was always payroll guard for the captain. He liked me because I was so sharp. I changed clothes at noon every day. I'd get my haircut every Friday at 1 o'clock. I was the sharpest soldier in our compound. Come to Commander knew it, and he put my name before the promotion board, and I was promoted to sergeant. No drinking now for that 5.5 months. That Saturday afternoon, after the marathon soldier sergeant stripes on, I was coming down from a shower on the hill, and the sergeants in the company were going to the club about 3 o'clock. And they said, Wallace, it's your responsibility to come to the club and buy some drinks. It's customary. It's a custom here in Korea. Well, I said, I'll be on down. I wanted to be nice to the guys I work with. So that afternoon, I changed clothes and I went down to the 38th Ordnance Club, and I'd never been in that club. I joined the guys at the table who had their Korean girlfriends with them. They were getting up, putting quarters in the jukebox, drinking beer, mixed drinks. They were dancing, holding those girls close. They looked good. Those short mini dresses on, I thought they had the little sisters' dresses on. Anyway, they looked good. And I'd been over there that 5.5 months, and I ain't had nothing. And I got to thinking, now, these guys are nice to me. I can drink a beer with them after all this time, and it's not going to hurt anything. So I ordered a beer, and I sat down and sipped on it for a while, and it disappeared, and nothing happened. I ordered another one, and it disappeared, and nothing happened. So I said, since nothing is happening, maybe I ought to get a double shot of Old Granddaddy Coke. After a couple of those, came some more. Anyway, in less than 2 hours' time, the bouncers in that club threw me right through the screen door. Didn't even bother to open it because I had been drunk and disorderly. And that was the way my drinking started in Korea. The next morning, I came to in my NCO room. I reached over the table and I got a half a fifth of whiskey and I started drinking on a Sunday morning. Monday morning, a different half fifth of whiskey was on the dresser. I reached over and began drinking it, knowing that I was going on duty, but it didn't matter. And I began drinking on duty. My appearance began to change around the company commander and the other guys. My performance at work was not the same. And it wasn't long before my sergeant stripes went by the wayside. I was back to corporal again. And I was real lucky to make it back to the States with the rank of corporal. Went to Fort Lee again. Was put on the same job I had instructor in the quartermaster school before going to Korea, in spite of my low education. I went to work in that school. And it wasn't long before guys in the company area were complaining about me. The mess sergeant was complaining about me. The guy said I'd come into the barracks, slam wall locker doors and fall over foot lockers and wake them up at night. The mess sergeant said I'd come into the mess hall and I'd puke in the floor. And those guys couldn't stand just a little small puddle. And they want me to be taken to the company commander, who got tired of it. He eventually started sending me to a chaplain for counseling. That didn't do any good. He sent me to a psychiatrist. That didn't do any good. And then I went to Richmond, Virginia. Had bought an old automobile and got caught for drunken driving and hit and run. And I'm one of those guys that's totally unpredictable when I drink. In Richmond, Virginia, that Sunday night, 2 other drunks from Fort Lee, soldiers just like me, they were from Tennessee and they drank the way I did. We were riding around. And we drove up behind the new automobile at the corner of US 1 and Belvedere Drive in Richmond, Virginia. Well, the car in front of me would not start. He started out when the light changed green, but it choked down and he couldn't get it going. Well, he got out of the car and came back and said, "Hey, buddy, will you give me a push?" I said, "Yeah, I'll be glad to." Well, I started easing up behind him, but I had been up a dirt street down the north side of Richmond. A cloud had come up and it was muddy up there. They'd been doing some construction work, and I had gotten mud on my foot, and that mud had gotten on the clutch. And when I started easing up behind him, my foot slipped off the clutch and I banged into his bumper and it teed him off. I won't say what it really did, but it teed him off. Anyway, he got out of the car and come back toward me, and he called me a drunken SOB. And I resented that. And he said something real stupid. He said, "Why don't you knock it out in the middle of the street?" I said, "Good idea." I backed up about 20 feet, got me a little running start, and I hit him. I didn't get him in the middle of the street, but I got him part of the way. And I went down the street about a quarter of a mile, half a mile, turn around and come back, and I'm riding up this side street, and they over here. And when I go by, I saw his hand come up, point toward me. Police were already there. One of them jumped in his car and come and got me. They charged me with drunken driving and hit and run. And I was to be tried on that. And before I could be tried on that, I was caught in Colonial Heights on 7 more driving charges. And The company commander was really teed off then. He took my record and put it before 12 officers. And every one of those officers looked at that record for the past 2 years. And every one of them said I had become alcoholically unfit to be in the United States Army. And they booted me out. I no longer looked like that guy that had been the Soldier of the Month, the guy that had performed excellently and was sharp as a tack. I didn't look like that anymore. And they booted me out because they knew I was going to be going to jail once I was tried, and because of my past actions. And they were right. I did go to court the next day, and I went to jail, and I pulled 57 days in Petersburg City Jail. I pulled 57 of the 90. I got out because my girlfriend, wife number one, had already declared that she was getting a divorce, and my girlfriend there in Richmond came up to get me out, and she was only 19 or 20 years older than I. And I never will forget how beautiful she was. All of her teeth on this side were missing. And when she smiled, it looked like a 39 Ford with half of the grill gone. And she came out to the back of the car when I came out of the jail door. And she saw me coming. And she had all of her grandchildren in the car. And she met me at the trunk of the car. And I told her, I said, Ruth, I'll never go to another jail as long as I live. I've learned my lesson. I don't like these places. I have been shoveling snow, mopping up puke in the drunk tank, frying salty herrings for breakfast, all that good, delicious food they served, things like that. That's the reason I got out in 57 days, because she paid the fine, $575 cost of court. Well, I came back to jail that night. Same jail, same cell. Ruth's sister and brother-in-law had come down from Washington, D.C. to help Ruth celebrate her lover getting out of jail. And Mac had got caught for drunken driving, and I was passed out in the back seat. I couldn't even pass out without getting in trouble. I went to jail, and that night, when they put me in that cell block, there was a guy in my bed. And I tried to make him move up to the top bunk, and he wouldn't do it. He said, that's my bed. I said, it's been my bed for 57 days. He said, but you gave it up this morning. It's mine now. Anyway, we had a little argument over that, and I lost. I got up off the floor when the guards come in, and they put me in a hole for the night. And that guy still had his bottom bunk the next morning. Anyway, I was crazy when I drank. I was totally unpredictable. I didn't know where I'd go, what I'd get into, who I'd insult or assault, or what I'd steal, or who I'd puke on, or say something nasty to. I didn't know what was going to happen. I was absolutely, totally unpredictable. And I didn't want to be that way. Mom and Dad finally found out where I was and wanted me to come home. I went home. I said no drinking. I started going with them to church, working in the mill on third shift, staying around his house, the store that he owned. And they introduced me to a lady that was 8 years older than I. She had a house, 13 acres of land, nice automobile, looked good, good job. And I had 2 pair of pants and 2 shirts, and she asked me to marry her. And I thought that was a pretty good deal. We got married. And Sue was a Baptist Sunday school teacher, but she was one of those Baptists that saw no harm whatsoever in dancing. Most of the Baptists around Roxborough would not dance. they wouldn't even have sex standing up. They was afraid somebody would think they was dancing. But Sue loved to dance. And we went to their dance that night, and I got up and tried to dance with her, and I couldn't. I had 9 left feet. When she wanted a dozy, I wanted a dough. When she wanted a promenade, I wanted a lemonade or whatever. I couldn't do it. And she went to the powder room with a friend, and that friend's husband worked in the mill with me. He slid a glass of old granddad across the table to me. And when Sue got back to the table, I was ready to dance. I did for a couple of numbers, but they had to wake me up at the back of the room where I passed out. When the dance was over, the musicians were putting the instruments up. Everybody was leaving. I went out the door behind Sue. She was crying. She was totally embarrassed, and I was vomiting and cursing. And that's the way that I put her through a lot of incidents for the next year. 62, that summer, I tried many, many times to quit. I had to quit on one occasion because of boils on my arms and legs. The doctors told me that if I didn't quit for a couple of weeks and get the alcohol out of my system, the medicine would not work. And I managed to do that for a couple of weeks. And it was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. But I managed to do it, but I went right back to drinking. And I tried. I wanted so much to be able to drink. I wanted to learn the secret to do it, whereby I could be responsible, be decent, be somebody, have friends, and look okay. And I just couldn't do it. I was out of control. I had been powerless over alcohol for a long, long time. After Christmas of 1962, I had bought my liquor 3 times for Christmas and drank it up every time. After Christmas, the 3rd weekend in January, I had worked enough to get a little money to buy the booze with. I didn't work every day. Anyway, the 3rd weekend, I began working on Friday. Got off at 2 o'clock. It was raining. I was doing carpenter work at the time. And I went up to the Be a Bootleg joint at 2 o'clock that afternoon. We had quit early because of rain. And I started drinking. I don't recall getting home Friday night, Saturday night, or Sunday night. But Monday morning, wife number 2 came into the bedroom. She had been preparing eggs and bacon in the kitchen. She asked me, was I going to work? And I said, yes. When I attempted to get off the bed that morning, my elbow hit something on the pillow, and it was 2 pints of white whiskey. And I sat down on the side of the bed that Monday morning and began drinking. And when she came back into the room to see why I wasn't coming in for breakfast, saw what I was doing, and I can assure you, she did not sound like a Baptist Sunday school teacher when she walked up in front of me. She sounded strictly from the pool room. And she told me I was a sorry, no good, low-down drunk. This is all I'd ever be. No good to employers, no good to my daughter by my first wife, no good to my parents, and no good to her. And she said, when I get home from work this afternoon, I want you out of my house, out of my heart, and out of my life forever. And she went on to work. And I don't recall leaving home that morning. I was told by some people and read in the paper later that I had apparently left home that morning and went down to the Be a Bootleg joint and called a taxi and went to town. And I do not remember anything at all about being in town. Sometime later, I remember the sheriff testifying at a trial, and the judge asked him to present the evidence. And I had been on a blackout. No way could I defend myself. The lawyer Mom and Dad hired could not defend me. the sheriff testified that he had looked out his window at 4 o'clock that Monday afternoon when I was on the street drunk. He knew me. He'd had some business with me several other times before. He knew me. He said he was going to come out and arrest me, but the telephone rang across the room, and he went over there to answer it. He said his secretary was sick. She was not working that day. He was on the phone, he said, about a minute. When he came back to the window and the door to see where I was gone. And I was wished a million times that he had arrested me that Monday afternoon, because sometime in the next couple of hours is when the offenses were committed that brought about my arrest at my home the next morning. He came out and carried me to town and placed me in jail, and no bond was allowed. That was January 21st of 63. 3 weeks later, I stood in Superior Court listening as to what that sheriff had said, listening as what the judge had said. He's a young man for these sentences, offenses committed. I hereby sentence you to the North Carolina Department of Correction for a period of 40 years plus natural life at the expiration. So take him out of here, sheriff. And it was on the 13th day of February that I was handcuffed and shackled and taken to the walls of Central Prison. 10 days later, I was given a job assignment. About 3 weeks later, the guys that I was working with in the classification section thought I was an inmate that would be okay, and they took me into their confidence and told me how that some outside issues were being smuggled into Central Prison. Told me how the bottles of alcohol was being smuggled out of the hospital, and that with money I could get those things. And I began getting most of all of the money I could get my hands on was spent on that stuff. And I began to get locked up while I was locked up. In June of that year, I was fired from that job because of drinking, because I knew more about the job than the superintendent did, who'd been there for 30 years, and I'd been there for 3 months. And they fired me. A couple other things happened that I'll never forget about June of 63. One of them was my wife went home from work on third shift one night, and that Monday morning, when she went into the bedroom, a man was waiting on her. She was assaulted, kidnapped, and robbed. It was about 10 days later that I found out about that. Also that month, I went to a crazy meeting that a guy asked me to go to with him. And it was a meeting called Alcoholics Anonymous. And I sat down at the back of the room, just like he did. And we heard some free people come in, and they talk about their drunk experiences. And sometimes they'd come in. I saw over the next few weeks, I saw some of them come in. They would hug an inmate, and they'd say, "I love you." But I knew it was love already there. 2 guys on the back row were holding hands every night, and I didn't want no part of it. Still don't. Other than saying a serenity prayer or a Lord's Prayer. But anyway, I did not participate in anything. Didn't read any literature, didn't help mop the floor, didn't help set up, didn't do anything. And that went on for 8 months. And I continued to do what I was doing. Got locked up again. Didn't get fired, though. I became a fairly good offset press operator in the prison workshop. February 16th, 1964. Don't think I'll ever forget that date, as long as I have my sanity. On that Sunday afternoon, I was in the library writing a letter to my precious mother, who was in her 70s. And I was always telling her how sorry I was for all the shame and heartbreak I'd brought on the family. And I had completed 2 pages of a 3-page letter I could write. A friend came in and put something on the table for me. I immediately threw it down and chased it with the Pepsi Cola I had there. And about 15 to 20 minutes later, completing that letter to my precious mother was no longer important. I tore it to shreds and put it in the trash can, went out to the chapel, the last window on the right-hand side, and I dug down into the dirt where I had some money buried, plastic dollars. And I got that money up, went to see the bootlegger, went to my room, 4th floor up, 2-man cell. I went in and proceeded to get drunk just as fast as I could. I came to that night, the count was over. And I'm sitting on the side of that bed, hurting. And I began thinking about my life. Here I am in Central Prison, absolutely a hopeless, helpless alcoholic. I can't get as drunk and stay as drunk for as long as I want to stay drunk. I don't have the money to get this stuff with, and I can't get sober because I don't have a program of recovery. With all of the despair and frustration that I experienced, the one thing that made sense to me as I had entertained for several weeks was suicide. Tonight I'll do it. Tonight I'll end my wretched existence. I knew that every night the cell block door would open at 9 o'clock. Guys could go in from watching television downstairs, or they'd have to stay down until 11 o'clock. I knew that door would slide open that night at 9 o'clock. I took everything that I had on that pillow and drank that last bottle of alcohol. And I stood at that door waiting for it to open so I could step out onto the concrete walkway and go over that railing head first. I knew that would do the job. It happened to another guy later. He was dead when the guards got to him. It had cracked his head like a coconut. I know that it was but for the grace of God that would have happened to me. You can call it sickness, blacking out, passing out, whatever you choose to call it. But you can tell I did go over that railing that night. And I believe that a loving God in His infinite mercy gave this sick, hopeless, helpless, frustrated drunk one last reprieve. I came to well past 9 o'clock. I'm sure my head is laying on the commode. My knees are on that concrete floor. And I have been vomiting in that commode, and I've been praying in that commode. And I pass out again. And sometime later I came to and crawled into my bed. And when I went out of the cell block the next morning, about 6 o'clock or 6:30, when the guards came around to see that we were out, going to breakfast and go to our respective jobs, the inmates on the right and on the left said to me, "What was going on in there last night?" I said, "What are you talking about?" They said, "Last night you cried out loud enough for everybody to hear you. God, if you help me get back to AA, I'll try." I no more remember saying that or praying that prayer than you do. But those guys had no reason whatsoever to fabricate such a story as that. No reason whatsoever. I tell you this, when I went back to AA the next Sunday night, I didn't sit down at the back of the room. I went up to the front, got on the left-hand side of that podium, and that became my seat. And after the meeting, I helped them put the chairs up. I helped mop around the coffee pot. I got some little pamphlets out of the literature rack and carried them to my cell block. And I didn't go downstairs to watch television. I began to sit in that cell block at night and read those pamphlets. Some 2 weeks later, Tom I, a lot of you know him, came to the meeting. He was the alcoholic rehabilitation officer for the central part of the state in prisons. He had been in prison. He was an alcoholic rehabilitation officer. He had 7 years of sobriety at that time. And I went up and talked with him after that meeting that night. And he talked with me a little bit, and then he reached over onto the news rack, and he got the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous, and gave it to me. It wasn't his, it belonged to Central Prison. I still got it in the trunk of my car. But it's a second edition, and people like the fourth edition, but the second edition will work quite well. I began to get into that book, and then I began to get active in the group, and I stayed sober. And he told me to work the steps, and I thought that I had worked them 1, 2, and 3, and I really got active in the group, became secretary, later on became chairman of the group, and this went on for a while. About a year and a half later, I had to go back to him and talk with him. I says, Tom, I don't have the quality of sobriety that some people have. What's wrong? He said, what step are you on? I said, well, I thought I'd worked step 3, and I've been waiting for God to zap me, and he ain't done it yet. Tom said he's not likely to. He says, you go back and start all over with step 1. And when you get to step 3, you read just what it says right down below it. It says that's the key to finding peace of mind and sobriety. And what it said just below that was, next, we launched out into a vigorous program of action. And I took it searching the fearless moral inventory. I found the Presbyterian minister from Greensboro who had 20 years of sobriety in AA. He came in to take step 5, or for me to take step 5 with him. When he came to prison that night, he brought 4 people with him at Tom's suggestion. Those 4 people were meeting with Tom downstairs. Tom told those people that if Alcoholics Anonymous will do, the steps will do for them what it has done for Wallace. It will be well worth the effort. And those guys began to come in and lead discussion meetings for the next year. 6 months at a time. They took a short break and then did it again for 6 months. And a lot of guys in prison at Central began to find a way of life that they had not known before. We went from 1 meeting a week to 3 meetings a week. I had become, later on, I became editor of the prison publication and did that for years. Later on, I was transferred out to the honor grade unit to work with Tom in the 30-day to 6-month published drunkenness program, and then I was transferred to Sanford when he was transferred up there. And I'll tell you this, and I'll quit. Wife number 2 came to Sanford, came to see me. She says, Wallace, it looks like you're going to be getting out in a few more years. But when you get out, you're going to have to give up on the AA thing. It's a cult. It's of the devil. The following week, I wrote Sue a letter. And I told her, if you think AA is a cult, is of the devil, you go to the devil. If you don't divorce me, I'll divorce you. And I waited 2 years, and then I divorced her. I married the wife number 3 today, Ashley's grandmother. We've been married for 38 years. She kissed me when I left home tonight. I have a nice home that I built the last year I was in prison. I've been active in service work, and I've tried to carry this message all over this nation into where I'm asked to go. And I'm going to keep on doing it. I go into Martian prison every Wednesday night unless I'm speaking somewhere else. Last Wednesday night, I spoke in Central Prison. Saturday night in Albemarle. Tonight, I'm here. Tomorrow night, I'll be back at Martian again. I'm going to do whatever it takes to carry the message of AA. Because some people, when I was a sick, hopeless, helpless, drunk behind the walls of Central Prison, came in not looking down on me, but showing me a way that I could find peace of mind and serenity behind the walls of Central Prison. I like to say I had wall-to-wall sobriety in that because I became absolutely free. I know that God in His infinite mercy after I took step 5 with Reverend John and began to get into 6 and 7 and 8 and 9, that the obsession to drink vanished. My book tells me that I have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body, but it also tells me that I am not cured. What I have is a day of reprieve contingent on the maintenance of my spiritual condition. I've got to maintain the things that I'm doing at this meeting tonight, in between meetings. It's not what I do in meetings that determines my sobriety. It's what I do between the meetings, out in the community, when I'm with those people out there. I love Alcoholics Anonymous, and I love the people in AA. That wife that I told to go to the devil, she didn't do it until last October. She died. She never loved AA. I went home to my brother's funeral some years ago, and I saw her and wife number 3 at the back of the room at the church. I said, uh-oh. Wife number 2 and number 3 is talking. But number 2 told number 3 that she knew better than to have said that, but she was trying to force me to give up on the thing. She couldn't do it. Nobody can make me change my mind about Alcoholics Anonymous. I believe with all my heart that Bill Wilson had a spiritual experience, that this program is divinely inspired for sick, hopeless, helpless alcoholics like me. I intend to stick with it and stick with you people. I love you.